Hello, I'm Elizabeth Lanchowski-Holmes, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining the panel on Reimagining Food as Medicine, Functional Food. I'm thrilled to have three wonderful panelists with us here today. Cessna, the head of portfolio services at PowerPlant Partners, Olivia Moore, director of strategy and operations at Mend, and Kim Soviero, head of strategy and operations at Sakara Life. We'll start by having each of our panelists give a brief introduction of themselves and their companies. Let's start with Cessna.
Thank you, Elizabeth. As mentioned, I'm the head of portfolio services at PowerPlant Partners. We've been recently rebranded. So we are a growth equity firm that invests in plant-centric branded consumer products, predominantly in the food and beverage space. Some of our flagship investments have been in Beyond Meat, Ripple Milk, Vive Organic, etc. And I'll share a few more, I'm sure, along the way. I joined on the investment team and helped lead sourcing, diligence, and portfolio support. And now, as head of portfolio services, I'm building in connectivity between our teams and the greater ecosystem in the food and beverage space. And prior to this, I worked at Parthenon, spent a large part of my career in management consulting, where Elizabeth had also worked. So although I am not a Tuck graduate, unfortunately, I feel very fortunate to have joined this community. And this is a very exciting summit. So thank you.
Thanks, Cessna. We're really excited to have you back this year. Olivia, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on today. I'm Olivia Moore. I am a Tuck 2020 recent graduate and currently the director of strategy and operations at Mend. And Mend is an early stage clinical nutrition startup based in New York. And Mend's really focused on making clinical nutrition a cornerstone of patient care within a healthcare context and beyond. And given that healthcare context, we really take a really rigorous science-based approach to our product formulation and focus most of our product portfolio on targeted nutrition, again, for specific stages of healing and conditions. So I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but excited to be on today and learn from all of you too.
Excellent. And last but not least, Kim.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here and honored to be with this group of high-powered ladies in the food and wellness space. But I am currently at Sakara Life. I'm the head of operations and strategy there. And Sakara Life is a wellness company. You know, we're basically on a mission to empower people to be in the driver's seat of their own health and to turn thoughts into things. And our core business is a nutrition program. So we deliver ready-to-eat nutrition around the country. It's all plant-based, gluten-free, and anchored around this idea of food as medicine. I joined 6 years ago and was the 13th employee, so I've seen a lot of growth in between now and then. And prior to this, I was also in the management consulting field. So spent a few years at Bain working on strategy and spent a good amount of time in the private equity space there as well. But excited to be with this group today and to be part of the conversation.
Thank you so much. We'll jump right in with some questions. Cessna, I'd love to start with you. From an investor standpoint, are there any trends that you've noticed in the food as medicine space or functional food space that you find particularly interesting? Are there any ideas or approaches that you've seen recently that really excite you?
Great. Yeah, I'll start a little high level and then I'll dive in. So I think unsurprisingly, I'm very excited about the movement that we've seen in the plant-based space. It is the focus of our firm, which was founded on the power of a plant-based diet to fix the food system and help in improving environmental sustainability, animal welfare, as well as health and wellness. And so I'm just really excited about all the movement we've seen from the consumer side, from government buying in, from the strategic's point of view, and larger companies. So on a very high level, I think that's where I'm really anchored by. And then additionally, on top of that, some of just the link between clinical studies and food and seeing that increase over the past couple of months and years has been very exciting. And I think one major thing I'm seeing that has been very exciting to me. So just keep learning more about is the link between gut health and brain health. And just really, you are what you eat, and it is a large part of what affects your day-to-day on a micro level and a macro level as well. And one of our portfolio companies, for example, is Perennial. They are a plant-based nutrition drink for longevity and for consumers that are in older generations, and their product is really to help bring out those qualities that support brain health and digestion, since it is a large part of what can cause stress, what can cause anxiety, but also what can really improve your lifestyle as well. I think another area that's really exciting is just to see that a lot of these branded and food and beverage products are also using unique routes to market with a lot of the products that they're putting on. Kate Farms is kind of a similar product, more targeted towards the earlier stage, and they really, I think, got their start going through doctors' offices, and it's really incredible. I've heard from my doctor friends, I wish I was half as smart as they were, but there's not a lot of training currently in the medical education scope that allows for focus on nutrition, but I think that that's really ready to change, and I think that there's a lot of excitement about it, and the focus is moving more and more towards preventative health, whole foods, and something that everyone can do every day.
Thanks, Cessna. Great to hear some of the areas that you're digging into right now and what excites you as an investor. Kim, I'd love to hear about Sakara Life and how you think about differentiating between fads and consumer trends that have staying power and developing products in line with those trends. How do you decide which trends to pursue and go on to develop products?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a little bit of a trick question, but let me start by just defining the terms from my point of view. I mean, I think trends are really things that last for over a decade. Food as medicine at this point is over a 10-year phenomenon. And even looking at consumer behavior and how people are starting to migrate to how they're shopping differently and, shifting to online shopping. So trends are really at the heart of everything that all companies do, because you have to go where people are going. You have to live the philosophies that they're living, be true to consumer behavior and perception. Now, within that 10-year period of an active trend, you may change how you represent that every 2 years, and that's totally okay. So if you don't upgrade that and change based on how the wind is shifting, you not only lose traction as a brand, but you can also lose trust. So just as an example, for a long time, skincare was not something that you even took care of as your skin. And then it was topical and it was ointments. And now it's all about radiating from the inside out. So you can look at our detox chlorophyll drops or at our beauty chocolates. And these fall under the larger trend of ingesting things that will help you with your skin. So it's a long-term trend, but chlorophyll is one of the ways right now that we're that's kind of blown up in the last month with a viral TikTok video. So will chlorophyll be the answer in 2 years? I don't know, but if it's not, that's okay. And, I think the one thing that I'll add to this too is that Sakara has always aimed to live at this intersection between science and spirit. So, in addition to the newness and the unique things that we want to be out there and learning and introducing new functional ingredients that are a little bit out there. Part of the Sakara experience is also that we want people to feel something, even beyond the functional ingredients, whether it's a ritual or a connection or the community. But, with that said, backing things up with science is critical. So we do a lot of literature review and we reach out to authors. We say, hey, since you published this in 2017, is there anything new? Have you changed your mind at all? And, it's our responsibility that although we're kind of setting these fads out into the world, we of course want to make sure that they're not dangerous, but we want to make sure that they are actually beneficial and proven, and that we continue to help enrich the literature around it. So, for us, that's how you bring together the science with the spirit. And then I guess also how you, from my perspective, balance the fad with the trends.
That's great. Really interesting to hear about how you kind of marry the scientific rationale behind products with the consumer perception and trust. That leads us pretty well into our next question for Olivia, kind of going off of what you mentioned, Kim, about evidence and what you mentioned, Cessna, about clinical trials and gathering evidence for the health benefits of certain foods and products. Olivia, can you tell us a little bit more about Mend's evidence-based approach and use of clinical trials in your product development and how this serves as a differentiator?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that most people think of supplements as kind of the Wild West, and it's a really crowded space. There are a lot of often unsubstantiated claims, and so at Mend we really try and differentiate ourselves along the lines of having a targeted product portfolio, like I mentioned, and getting there by way of really harnessing like the power of natural ingredients with really the scientific rigor of what you would usually expect in pharmaceuticals. So to that end, since we have, like I said, a targeted product portfolio, we'll usually start with identifying a need in healthcare, a condition that we want to address. A lot of our current products are actually focused on orthopedics. So we'll start with that, and our science board and our amazing R&D director will then usually go down one of two paths for formulation, either digging into existing studies and research on how nutrients impact those conditions as they've been studied in the past, or potentially look into reverse engineering, again, digging into a lot of the science to lay the groundwork. But a lot of what then she and the science board will focus on is optimizing the ingredient combinations, the ingredient sourcing, and the dosage, so that we really all of that has a huge impact on the efficacy and the bioavailability, and ultimately in practice, the return to function for patients who are taking the end product, so that they actually experience the benefit, and physicians will hopefully also see it themselves. So that's a huge focus. We don't put a lot of extra things in there. We don't throw in extra sugar or all of these other things. We're very thoughtful about that. And then we do pursue clinical trials for our products to really get that validation of, again, the combination of nutrients and the efficacy. And we focus a lot, as I mentioned before, on the return to function when we're actually looking at some of the results. And that's something that some of our competitors don't look as much at that sort of functionality piece that we do. Especially, it's important in the orthopedic context. And that's where also, as it relates to clinical trials, partnering with leading researchers and hospitals and physicians is hugely advantageous. We're working with them to continue to prove out the full product itself and iterate to improve formulations over time.
Thank you. That's fascinating to hear about Mend's kind of scientific evidence-based approach to product development. I'd love to pivot into talking about growth strategies in this space. And Cessna, I'd like to ask you about what are some of the biggest obstacles functional food or food as medicine companies face from your standpoint as a VC? And what strategies have you seen to overcome these obstacles? And maybe you can bring in some experience from your portfolio companies.
Yeah, I think Olivia did a really great job touching on one of the key areas, and it's really, being able to claim truthfully the things that you are trying to build consumer trust and education around. Actually, I think there are so many amazing ingredients that are very natural to whole foods, etc. And they're being shown in different forms in a lot of the products in today. So I think one of the major areas that we've seen a lot of activity in is adaptogens, and this comes in the form of supplements. It comes in the form of superfood blends. One of our portfolio companies, Your Super, they are predominantly direct-to-consumer company. They just launched Target.com as well. So they have done just a fantastic job of really highlighting their benefits and building out a program to make it easy and accessible and to educate consumers along the way about what function these consumers can really look towards and how you can really, the whole mission is and belief is that people can really support their health through the power of plants. And that's exactly what the co-founders' stories are. So Crystal and Michael are the two co-founders, and at the age of 24, Michael had cancer, and on his recovery, Crystal was able to support his health and recovery through the blend of superfood powders. And so this is really, I think as science continues to back additional research on what these ingredients are able to do, it's kind of bringing consumers along with the journey, being very authentic and being very truthful about what is possible, what is not, as definitely a big challenge. And I think Kim, you had mentioned it too, of making sure that you build that trust, and it's really just making sure that you're communicating in the way that consumers are able to learn with you through the journey as well.
I think for the health conscious consumer, they are kind of convinced by the health benefits of some of these functional food products. But for consumers who may not be as aware of nutrition or health products, do you think there's a right balance that these companies can strike between kind of conveying the health benefits and taking a scientific medical approach versus just kind of taking a general marketing approach and appealing to consumer interest and demand?
I think both of these ladies can definitely speak to that as well. But the FDA has clear rules on what can be said and can't be said on claims and packaging. So if there's any entrepreneurs in the audience, that's definitely something to keep a pulse on. And I do think it's never trying or not misrepresenting the effect of the claims that you might make, and also sharing what is true to the brand and what you're trying to build. So it's a fine line, but I think as research continues, we're going to be able to define that line even more clearly. And I think there are really incredible companies leading the way in that. And Men sounds like they're doing amazing things on that front as well.
Awesome.
Just to chime in on that too, I mean, I think science has been around forever, and chemistry and biology for millennia. But when you think about nutrition, it's really 50 years. I don't know. It's a little bit finger in the wind, but this is a new science. And so there is so much emerging, and there's a real responsibility, of course, like we'll follow and, echo Cessna's sentiment here about the FDA, like definitely make sure you're familiar with like what's allowed and not. And also, we've circled around this idea of trust a few times, and nothing is more sacred than the trust of your consumers. If you have that, people will follow you and stay with you and learn with you. But if you sacrifice that and break it, it's really hard to recover. And that, not just in food, but especially in something that's so sacred and personal, and especially when it's supposed to be medicine, there's a real ethical responsibility to make sure that we're living that.
And I would just say that the other point as you move more in the medical direction is just, and I think Cessna touched on this earlier, is there's a bit of a gap sometimes in medical school and in medical practice. My father's a physician too, and he is not very up to speed on what nutrients may or may not help his patients. So, in addition to having the consumer trust, there's a huge part of course, winning over those healthcare providers and getting them to really understand the importance and the true value add of this as part of their sort of care protocol. is just also really important, at least we find.
Thanks for your perspective on all that. Kim, I'd love to ask you about Sakara life and your growth trajectory. I learned that Sakara recently closed $15 million in Series B funding. Congratulations.
Thanks.
What are your plans for growth? And I'm interested in how Sakara thinks about growing its meal delivery business versus investing in its CPG products.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, we have big plans for growth. You know, our mission is to transform lives, and now the goal is just to transform even more. So we really want to create a global wellness movement, and as I mentioned before, you know, give tools to empower people to be the driver's seat of their own health. So just to take a step back, you know, even from the early days, both pre and post Series A, we've always been focused on building a really smart, sustainable business with strong fundamentals, and that's served us really well over time, and it's allowed us to choose really carefully in terms of the investors that we wanted to partner with. And so, you know, at this point, really feel so excited about the world-class investors and board of directors that we have. We've recently brought on John Replogle and his team from One Better Ventures. He's the former CEO of Seventh Generation and Burt's Bees. We have Bob Myled, but it was, you know, early days with us from Annex Capital, but now that we have this all-star team, we also have gas in the tank that we can really start to invest. And I think, you know, both in specialized leadership and more depth of experience across the company, and things like technology and investing a little bit more aggressively in marketing, but especially in the innovation and creating even more of these tools that we can really give to people, whether that's continuing to expand our product, our content, or our reach. So, you know, and then to answer the second part of your question, you know, when we think about growth, it's really about growing Sakara as this wellness brand and as a CPG company. And so I think for us, you know, our nutrition program is a product, and we have some of these other, you know, maybe more traditional CPG products that are also, so, you know, we're less about choosing one or the other of, you know, picking a favorite kid across the portfolio, but really more about focused on building this one powerful brand and giving people a myriad of ways that they can come to us and stay with us on their wellness journey over time.
Thanks for sharing. I'm really excited to see what Sakara does in the next few years. Olivia, I'd love to hear more about Men's distribution strategy, selling nutrition products through physicians and other healthcare professionals. Can you walk us through what that looks like and maybe tell us what some of the advantages or disadvantages of this distribution strategy is?
Yeah, so as you pointed out, our growth strategy has largely been focused on B2B and going into partnerships with hospitals, private practices, physicians, physical therapists, other healthcare providers to really recommend our products to their patients when they need them most. Usually that's perioperatively, so before and after surgery, or after a recovery from breaking their arm or, you know, a related condition. And so it's definitely, I think, a path that fewer, you know, nutrition supplements might take. But I think of the advantages as for us, having those relationships, like I touched on earlier, is huge because we are able to, you know, launch studies with partners, get really, of course, expert feedback from them, work on reformulating our products. Sometimes we'll hear from some of our partners about a need or an idea that they have, especially those physicians who are really sort of ahead of the game of understanding how important nutrition is. They'll come to us with some ideas and help with formulations. But it's really great to have, again, the partnership for clinical trials to continue to validate the real-time expert feedback. And then, you know, from an optics perspective, it's really excellent to be deployed in some of these incredible research and institutions and hospitals, along with the military, and those partnerships are super valuable to us from that perspective too. I also think that, from the healthcare providers' perspective, healthcare has shifted in such a way that physicians, hospitals are really taking a lot more ownership of their patients' outcomes. And so it's really incumbent upon physicians to reduce, rates of readmission and future complications. And so we find that incorporating this extra layer of care to add to healing, to improve outcomes, really ends up paying off long term. And so that's even an economic benefit for a healthcare provider to just incorporate this into their care. I would also say that, we've all mentioned a more informed consumer, and that extends to being a patient. Patients are coming in and asking about nutrition now. They want to know what they can take to recover faster or better, get up on their feet sooner. And again, it goes back to the issue of a lot of physicians aren't nutritionists, and it's harder for them to always stay in the know. And so we feel like we provide them with, again, like, since it's a targeted product, it's really easy for them to just recommend something simple and for the patient then to take it. So compliance is very high. So that's, of course, a benefit both for the physician because they can add that layer of care, and for the patient who can take something very easily and tends to be more satisfied with the care just from getting another recommendation. So those are a couple immediate advantages, I would say, of working directly with healthcare providers. I do think those definitely outweigh the disadvantages. The disadvantages, I think, as I touched on earlier, doctors are definitely hard to get a hold of, to often like get them up to speed or speak to them about nutrition. I think I've already touched on earlier that physicians have a bit of a gap sometimes, or maybe just more mature physicians who are less in the know about nutrition. There's definitely an element of education when you're sort of creating a new category for patient care. And then the other thing I would think of is hospital formularies are challenging to get into. There are a lot of hoops to jump through, but luckily they require a lot of strong evidence. But once you're in, you're in. So it's, I think overall like a perfect spot for us, and it's really mutually beneficial to our company, patients, and providers to really working on this category creation together for Mend. So
awesome, thank you. So I'm interested in how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted each of your businesses in terms of production or sales and distribution or consumer demand. I imagine that we've all had to make some shifts in the last year and a half. And if you have any anecdotes or takeaways from how you've had to pivot or adapt, would be interesting to hear. Cessna, do you have any anecdotes from PowerPlant partners and or your portfolio companies?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to one. So we are investors in Thistle, which is also a plant-based prepared meal delivery service. And the co-founders are also a husband-wife team, Ash and Shiri. And I was just incredibly impressed with the level of care that they took for their employees. They have their own production facility, and it did impact production and making sure that rather than having people, maybe 3 feet next to each other, the lines had to be extended so people had enough space to be socially distant, and constant communication with consumers to make sure that they are still that trusted source, they're taking the right precautions, etc. So I think that was one very tangible moment, but I was just so impressed with the way that they were able to operate and really take care of their employees and share their story with their consumers as well, to make sure that this was still a safe space. And sales, for us, we are very focused on branded consumer food and beverage. And luckily, people, even in a pandemic, need to eat and drink. And so for us, food and beverage ended up being one of the bright spots up in what was a really challenging time for a lot of the market. And so overall, we saw an uptick in a number of our companies for sales. And then, on the earlier side of things, as we were working with companies that were looking for financing, et cetera, it was really challenging for a lot of the earlier, younger brands to find enough shelf or to win shelf space at retailers who were literally just trying to keep toilet paper on the shelf, mostly. Huge backup with distributors. And so, I think what that resulted in was just a really hard, really challenging, but really amazing creative push on the innovation side, and new brands and amazing entrepreneurs finding new ways to get to the consumer. And we saw this rise in e-com sales, which is fairly new for food and beverage. And you don't necessarily want to ship 12 cases of water to someone when you can just buy it at the grocery store. But if water is out, then consumers are looking for some other place to do it. And how do you, what Kim was saying earlier, how do you make sure the fundamentals are right for that? And or if they can't be right, how do you make sure you're still able to connect with the consumers that way? So I think it was a really rocky time for a number of brands. And for us, we were able to bring our CEOs together just during this time, sort of as a things are crazy right now. Everyone just share where your thoughts are. How are you personally feeling, managing your own stress, and also trying to manage your team and making sure everyone feels happy and safe and healthy. So it was just, I think, obviously a challenging time for just so many people all around. But the silver lining of that, it really helped people find those bright spots and in really amazing ways too. So it's not something that I think any of us would like to repeat or see again, but I think, when there's a challenge, there's a way to rise. And so I was just so amazed by what I saw through all the companies that we came across and through the teams that we encountered as well.
That's great to hear, and I think I can echo some of the things, Cessna, that you probably saw. I mean, by early March, we had everybody fully masked, and I can tell you that we found the depths of the internet and scientific studies that were coming out of Asia and other places earlier in the wave of the pandemic to try to understand, well, how do we keep our teams safe? At the end of the day, are we making the right decision to stay open and to keep producing this food, which is medicine, and that our clients need and want. And we're able to get confidence around that and implement a lot of these safety measures. And at the time, we actually were building our new kitchen facility, and so we did need to limit capacity. We did need to spread things out and decrease the number of bodies that we had in the building. And so obviously early on that created a lot of uncertainty for us, just in terms of thinking through worst case scenarios and what if we have to shut down the production facility, and what does that look like for the team first and foremost, but also for the business. And I would say, from an economic perspective, Sakara is a premium product, and so early on there were some of these puts and takes, which were it's food, it's wellness, it's taking care of yourself, it's at home food delivery. All of these things were kind of on the up and up, but at the same time, people were home cooking more, dining more with their families, a little bit less of the individual and convenience factor. And I think it was all under a cloud of economic uncertainty, where people had a big question mark over whether they would keep their own jobs, and whether they should be kind of tightening their belts around things that they might consider to be I guess non-essential spend. So all to say, we started out kind of flat, which felt like a very fortunate place to be for sure on the in the middle of a pandemic. And what we saw actually was then just kind of unusual patterns where So you will usually see a slight dip in the summer as kids are out of school and people might be traveling more. And actually, summer, we really started to gain more and more momentum. And, come fall, the uptick came a little earlier, and we actually ended the year even stronger than our original kind of pre-COVID plans, which was, really exciting. But I think, what we feel most proud about is just that we never had to shut down production. We kept our 2 facilities open and operating, and actually pulled off 2 facility moves, one on each coast in the midst of it. But we're able to be there for our clients and support them through all of it. The other thing that Cessna mentioned that I'll echo is just, wow, what an opportunity to think about leadership and to think about, a business kind of running, many businesses running full speed ahead with a certain MO and suddenly saying, okay, we're going to stop this. Everybody's suddenly on Zoom. We're in different places. There's, a huge opportunity for just communication from the top and being in touch with everyone at the company. And, I think being transparent about what we know and what we don't know, and just using that opportunity to build trust internally as well. And I think, I think most people are probably surprised by how quickly we innovated then, on the internal side within companies to say, we're going to pull a 180 and completely change the way that we're running our business and doing meetings and connecting with people all over the world. So lots of learnings, but yeah, definitely feel fortunate to be on the essential business side of things, and that we were able to, really protect our team and serve our clients through all of
it. Yeah, and I would say I would echo a lot of what's already been said. As it relates to Mend, in particular, I guess going back to the potentially double-edged sword of working with healthcare providers is, of course, that when elective surgeries shut down, that really slowed down that part of the business for us. And then that also has a tail into the physical therapy that we also work with physical therapists. So that definitely slowed down some of those initial rollouts. For a while when elective surgeries had slowed. And there's still a lot of, social distancing and waiting rooms where it's harder to put your products on display if it, in a doctor's office or a physical therapy waiting room. But I would say that the silver lining of that was that when doctors did have more time, because surgeries had slowed down, they actually had more bandwidth to jump on the phone with us and give us some feedback and take calls. And so besides that, we also work with a lot of professional sports teams, and of course with a lot of those games shut down, that was a little slower as well. I think the supply chain kind of slowdowns were pretty universal, of just having a hard time or having much longer lead times for getting plastic bottles and getting new inventory manufactured. But luckily, we are a small team and really have all of our sort of infrastructure set up already online. So I think I came in remotely and only met my team actually in person for the first time 2 weeks ago, which was exciting. But it's been a good, I think, even bonding experience just to get through the tough times and to keep the energy up through even when things have maybe been a little bit slower than expected.
In the interest of time, we have a few minutes left. Maybe we can have one more question. And I'd like to ask each of you maybe some quick advice you have for students or the audience listening in that are excited to get into the consumer health and functional food space, or entrepreneurs that are looking to start a business in this industry. If you had a quick piece of advice, what would it be? Maybe we can start with Cessna again.
Yeah, I think that I think probably one thing I will put out there is identify what problem it is that you really want to solve, and especially if you're an entrepreneur, how authentic and how passionate you are about that problem, since it's a really hard journey to go through. And so there are so many innovative companies in this space, and I think that there's lots to be done in improving what's already out there, and also discovering new opportunities as well. So that's probably what I'll share.
Thank you. Kim, do you have a quick piece of advice?
Sure. Yeah, that's great advice, Cessna. I would also say, get involved. Like, conferences like this are amazing, and there are communities like this popping up all over the world, which is now more accessible than ever over, Zoom and all the other technological tools. So, whether it's Slack groups or whether it's conferences or networking groups, there's a million ways to just learn more and connect with other people that are interested in this space. And the second part of that advice is just connect with people, and get to know people. I think now more than ever, people are open to taking the call and connecting. I think there's a real hunger for connection in this world where we've all kind of been, remote and to some degree isolated. So I would just really recommend trying to connect with people, learn more about the space that you're interested in, and build a community of people that you can learn from and grow with over time.
I heard that hunger pun. I really liked it.
I would just add that, and especially for business school students, I think you have to go a bit off the beaten path. I think that internships are always a nice introduction, and I can say that I also would highly recommend jumping into a startup. You learn a lot, unless you want to be an entrepreneur. Well, in which case you should go for it, following Cessna's advice. But you really learn a lot really quickly, and can make a lot of great connections, especially if it's not the pandemic. You're hopefully meeting more people in person. But I think the networking piece that Kim mentioned is also just really key, and reaching out, even if you don't necessarily have a background in it. People are always just willing to hop on and get you up to speed or talk about what they're passionate about.
And the flip side of that, even if they don't respond, there's really no harm done either. So
yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you so much, Cessna, Kim, and Olivia, for your time and insights. It's been really fun to hear about your experiences. So thank you so much. And next up, we have a panel on food without compromise, cultivated food and dairy, featuring New Age Meats, Avant Meats, Memphis Meats, and Turtle Tree Labs. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Elizabeth.